Thank you, everyone. I'm Mohammad Tavakkoli, the inaugural director of the Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali Institute of Iranian Studies at the University of Toronto. I welcome you all to today's session of Rethinking History, returning to archives and documents featuring Dr. Nader Sohrabi, who will be speaking on petitions, taxes, and democratization, constitutionalism, and the public in Iran. I would like to thank Dr. Sohrabi for accepting our invitation to share his archival exploration and research with us. Rethinking History is a virtual seminar series co-convened with my colleague, Professor Arzu Azad of Oxford University. This series is a collaborative project of the EOM Institute at the University of Toronto and the Invisible East program and the Faculty of Asian and Middle Eastern Studies at Oxford. I'm grateful to Professor Arzu Azad for this inspiring collaboration. I'm also grateful to Roshan Cultural Heritage Foundation and Dr. Elahé Omidyar Mir-Djalali for their exemplary support of the EOM Institute. At the outset, and before introducing our speaker, I would like to express our collective gratitude to Canada's Indigenous people and acknowledge this land on which the University of Toronto operates. For thousands of years, it has been the traditional land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and most recently, the Mississaugas of Credit River. Today, this meeting place continues to be the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we are grateful to have the opportunity to teach and learn on their ancestral homeland. Dr. Nader Sohrabi, our speaker today, will be introduced by my colleague, Dr. Arzu Azad.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Tavakkoli Tari. Always a pleasure to work with you as well. And I thank you for your guidance and inspiration as well. And all of you who have been participating. And this is now, we're reaching the end of our second semester. And so far it's been a big success. And that comes down also to our participants. So thank you for that. And I look forward to planning the next semester, which we are now in the midst of. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Professor Nader Sohrabi. He holds a PhD in sociology from the University of Chicago. Professor Sohrabi also has an MA from the University of Chicago on sociology and a PhD from the same. And previously, he received his BA from the University of Wisconsin in Madison in sociology and economics. And he studies early 20th century transformations in the Middle East, primarily in the Ottoman Empire, but also in Iran. He has taught at various U.S. universities, including Columbia, and was recently a member at the Institute for Advanced Study at Princeton, in the School of Historical Studies. Well, maybe not so recent. It's been a good 9 years.
So recent. Yeah.
Good 9 years. His book, Revolution and Constitutionalism in the Ottoman Empire and Iran, was published by Cambridge University Press in 2011. He's currently at work on a book project provisionally entitled Reluctant Nationalists, Imperial Nation-State and Neo-Ottomanism, Antinomies of the End of Empire. And here he comparatively investigates the development of ethnic nationalism within the Muslim communities of the Ottoman Empire, particularly among the Turks, Albanians, and Arabs, in relation to one another and in dynamic interaction with the Balkan Wars and the First World War. And I think all I need to say now is that Professor Sohrabi is now a senior researcher at the Freie University of Berlin, working on his own project funded by the Deutsche Forschungsgesellschaft, DFG, from 2022 until 2025 on it's a study of petitions in Iran in the early 20th century. So he's joining us from Berlin today. And with that, I am very happy to pass the word to Professor Sohrabi. Sohrabi, please.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your very generous introduction, and thank you for this lovely group of people who have taken the time to attend. I wanted to start by telling you a bit about collecting these material. I collected them a long time ago. I don't want to say 30 years, but it's not too far. I collected them in the Sazwan Ahsab Milli, the archives of Iran in Tehran, and I traveled in various places. I traveled to Urumiyeh, I traveled to Isfahan, I traveled to Tabriz, and perhaps other places. And I didn't have much success collecting material there, unlike Tehran. I also Majlis, and unfortunately they hadn't carried back then the petitions that they had. So the research is confined to, for the most part, the National Archives of Iran. And I haven't found the time to work on them until now. And partly the reason I have started to work on them was partly due to recent developments in petition studies, which are very exciting. And Arzu seems to be part of that dynamic. I had no idea. So the petitions in question that I am concerned with belong to the constitutional period in Iran between 1906 to 1911. These allow for a writing of history from below, and they can teach us a bit about the neglected aspect of democratization. They also tell us about the differences between the first and second constitutional period. And finally, such history from below has the potential to offer a serious rethinking of that history. Usually, democratization is in that movement has been thought of as the public quest for freedom, democratization by means of a constitution, the growth of public sphere, formal channels of politics like the legislative assembly, voting, elections, separations of powers, party formation, secularization through law. But perhaps we are able to summarize as global aspects of this revolution. When it comes to dynamics of localization of the global, the discussion is confined to Islamization of constitutionalism, either through figures like Mustashar-ud-Dawleh and Malkam, or from a Shiite angle through clerics such as Khorasani and Naim. And these are all in dialogue in one way or another with Enlightenment discourse. We know the constitutional movement in Iran had been the most popular movement in the Middle East up to that point. What explained its popularity? Was it the quest for liberty? Was it the convincing Islamization of the constitution that rallied the public? This is a puzzle, but I do not think the answer is to be found in any of the above. It is quite well known that constitutional movement of 1905, 1906 started with a call for the creation of a House of Justice. And if we look at the demand more carefully, the protesters did not ask for a single House of Justice, but houses of justice throughout Iran, with the understanding that Tehran's House of Justice would act as the principal. This demand was soon overshadowed by the call for an assembly and the eventual creation of a parliamentarian body. And it is the latter that is celebrated and remembered by the public, by the present-day public, and historians alike. From this moment, we investigate and judge the creation of this new institution against the backdrop of its global cousins, Ottoman Chamber of Deputies, the Russian Duma, and contemporary parliaments. Against this backdrop, we judge it by asking how the elections were conducted, how wide was the franchise, how it managed the separation of powers, how liberal or conservative was its constitution, how well it did public rights, including those of minorities, how it managed religion from politics, and what was the extent and content of its legislation, and for example, political parties.
Dr. Sohrabi, I was wondering if you'd forgotten maybe to share your PowerPoint. Did you want to show it or not?
No, I don't have a PowerPoint yet, but at the end I have that PowerPoint of petitions and whatnot. Yeah.
Sure.
For now, I don't have a PowerPoint yet.
No problem.
Yeah, and we also know that one indicator of democratic growth is the extent of expansion of the public sphere. And like our criteria for judgment for all the above, we turn to the global one and judge it by the extent of the growth of the middle class, the press, and readership, content of journals like Hablul Matin, Sur Israfil, Musavat, and the like. In short, again, the discourse of enlightenment and liberty and rights. I believe these to be perfectly legitimate approaches and fair global comparisons to make. I have done it myself extensively. But if we confine our analysis to that, we will be missing out on a good part of the story of this movement and the deeper lessons it had about the transformation of culture of politics, neglected forms of democratization with more palpable results, and public agency. The general public certainly came into contact with the Enlightenment discourse through all the above, but its conduct shows that it is not simply engaged with those issues. Its agenda sets it apart from the constitutional elite, lay or religious. If we take the call for House of Justice seriously and look at the petitions addressed to it, we realize the public was engaged in a tax revolt. Its aim was to revive houses of justice throughout Iran with petitioning the source of justice as its main form of expression. Within Islamic history, this institution is better known as Majlis Mazalim. But it is ignored by constitutional historians because it does not fit the global narrative, and it is ignored by scholars of religion because of Mazalim institutions' ambiguous and uncomfortable connection to Sharia. Yet I consider Mazalim a key to understanding this movement's popularity. I also believe that the associations connected to them were major tools for deepening democracy at the grassroots level. By one recent estimate, 500 associations sprang up throughout Iran within a few months. But I suspect, in fact, that there were more, as attested by archival sources. The most important associations, the provincial and sub-provincial associations, acted as local houses of justice or courts of Mazalim. The public addressed their petitions there and expected delivery to the main house of justice in Tehran, that is the assembly or the parliament. And the public perceived the assembly not as a parliament, but a place where grievances were attended to. They also expected it to execute power and carry out its verdicts. At the start, the Shah was expected to be the source of justice. In fact, the assembly decorated the entrance to its compound with the words Muzaffar's justice, thus accepting subservience to Muzaffareddin Shah and accepting his claim. Over time, however, the assembly distanced itself from the Shah and it itself claimed his position as the source of justice. As for grievances that flooded the assembly from the first day of operation, one thing stood out. Almost all targeted the onerous local taxes. That is in Persian, tafawut amal or far, but not the central taxes, amal kard or asl. Why? Partly because the local taxes were higher, were extracted more arbitrarily, and their levels depended on the extractive power of the local earners and staff. These varied from place to place, even within a single province. For the public, to target the local as opposed to central taxes also gave a message about the legitimacy of the center and expectations of help from it to alleviate local injustices. But there was a major shift in petitioning at this time compared to the previous era. That is, compared to the findings of Schneider, for example, and her study of Naderi's petitions. And I can point to at least 7 of them. What was changed was the agency behind petitions. They from individual to collective petitions before, but they were far, far less. At this period, all are collected. 2, the vehicles of delivery now with agents rather than personally. 3, their volume, which is massive. 4, the content and form, from expressions of needs in deferential quote-unquote petition response format to the powerful expressions of the change, the assembly, and no longer the Shah. 6, the expectations changed from the with certains of power, sometimes based on rights. And finally, petitions went from private to public, predominantly individual and meant for the Shah's only, to a public dialogue on the nationals. Still, we see remnants of the old language, the reference to Fadaviyan, Duaguyan, the circle of justice, Ru'aya, Gorg, Shah as the shepherd, 4 elements in balance. And some refer to the assembly and associations as the newly established chain of justice, thus is implicitly invoking the legend of Shah Anushiravan, who became alerted to the aggrieved when the chains reaching his palace doors were shaken. Eventually, assembly took the position of the shepherd and the shelter for the sheep against the wolf being the Shah. We see these changes clearly in Yazd. For example, Yazd is interesting for not being Tehran, Tabriz, Rasht, Anzali, or Isfahan, the major centers of constitutional activity. For a 6-month period between 1907 to 1908, we have about 200 petitions and discussions around them by the assembly and the ministries. We are very lucky to have these because they were supposed to have that assembly, numbers survive at the ministerial archives. And this is a big discovery actually for me, that we knew that the petitions actually vanished with the fire that set to the assembly, and I was hoping that actually in connection to discussions that some of them would be preserved at the ministries, and they are, which is very good. Within this short period, we observe a surprising transformation in the province, from the prime minister's haughty rejection of the public demands and threatening it with violence, to him chasing after protesters for further negotiations. The ease and clarity with which the public was heard at the capital was nothing short of astounding, thanks mostly to the assembly. The collective negotiations nurtured the culture of democratic decision-making with clear results and fair outcomes. These included a full-year cancellation of local taxes, substantial reduction in the coming years, dismissal of the governor and detested tax officials, and installment of publicly favored administrators. The Yazd Association in Tehran, and more importantly, the Tabriz Association and popular press helped popularize their mission. And for the first time on record, Yazd found its publics negotiating amongst themselves, and equally important as a province with Tehran. The bombardment of assembly we see the same form of collective by the Ministry of Finance for oppression of subjects after complaints from the assembly, itself the result of petitions, wrote back that in these changed times, it was impossible to treat even the lowliest peasant, adni rayat, unjustly. They expressed their mind freely without trepidation. This is a quote. Do you believe the subjects has any fear of the governor, minister, or local ruler? At the slightest whiff of abuse, he runs to the provincial association to plead for justice with wife and child in tow.
Dr. Sohrabi, you are breaking up. We can't hear you.
Okay. Don't know what to do.
You're good now.
I'm good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Bojnurd, Torbat, Turshiz, Baenat region, Bihud, Birjand, Tabas, Tus, Gonabad, Bushruye, Juvain, and many other towns and villages, the public in Khorasan managed to repeal the recently increased taxes instituted by Asafadullah. A few places like Darjaz also managed to appoint their new rulers of choice. In Gilan and in Azerbaijan, and I'm only covering very few places, we see the rise of stronger associations that scored many victories for public in terms of resistance to taxes and appointment of rulers in conformity with the general wish. Tavalesh, a large region of Gilan, paid almost no taxes in 1907-1908 and forced out its strong governor, Sardar Amjad, in humiliation. Through collective petitions, the assembly, gatherings in the associations, and the popular associations press, the public found its own voice, came to define its own interests, and engaged in a discussion of public good. This was an alternative public sphere that was not Enlightenment inspired, although it inevitably came into contact with that and without becoming dissolved in it. Petitioning and popular associations deepened democratization. They expanded participation substantially beyond the restrictive franchise and the limited numbers who voted. They acted as better barometers of public opinion. Negotiation and bargaining through them amplified the democratic culture and attained fairer outcomes. Furthermore, the mass petitions received by the assembly boosted its claim of representation and helped tilt the balance against the monarch. Now, this was the first period. What happens in the second period? With the defeat of Muhammad Ali Shah at the start of the second period, the relations between associations, the assembly, and the government changed again. In places where resistance to Muhammad Ali's rule had been the strongest, like Azerbaijan and Gilan, associations began to act like local governments. In general, all associations became more confident across the board. At this time, given the extensive responsibility legally obliged to perform, the associations now asked for salaries and budgets. The Tehran government and the assembly, acting together, refused. Their argument: similar associations were voluntary and practiced by goodwill citizens. Furthermore, no budget had been assigned originally, and changing the law needed a general bill for all of Iran, which they didn't have at the time. In essence, the penniless state engaged in foot dragging. This became a major reason for the rift between the associations on the one hand and the new government and the assembly on the other. There was another and even more surprising development. In the first period, two ministers of finance had independently told the assembly that if it did not stand up to the public then, a public that was demanding an end to the local taxes, it would soon go after the central taxes. And this is exactly what happened in Azerbaijan and Gilan. Gilan remained for long stretches of time without a governor. What we see through the documents is that Gilan Association has established a cabinet of ministers resembling a local government that ran, in its own words, the majority of tasks that belong to the provincial administration. Seeing Tehran's resistance to its demands, it warned the finance office not to send any funds to Tehran or to make any deposits of any kind without its permission. The next day, it occupied the office and confiscated records and receipts. The procurator, I mean the head finance official in the province, Pishkar Mali, thought that if serious action was not taken by Tehran, it will, quote, embolden all other provinces and cause complete abdication of authority everywhere. This prompted the center to send a new government and military force from Tehran to run the affairs of Gilan. And I cannot tell if this government ever arrived. On the other hand, to avoid things from getting out of hand, it placed pressure, the government placed pressure on the treasurer, Schuster, to release funds for the associations, especially toward military expenses. Now, when we come to Azerbaijan, we see that this is actually an extreme case. In a total overhaul of the traditional structure, Tabriz saw the emergence of a local government with a full cabinet of ministers modeled after the government of Tehran. It worked closely with Azerbaijan Provincial Association and enjoyed its unconditional support. More surprising was their mutual desire to release Azerbaijan from Tehran's orbit in more ways than one. The pattern of cooperation between the two was emulated in many places throughout Azerbaijan, where the local rulers and sub-provincial associations acted in tandem. Thus, Tabriz ignored the Tehran-appointed governor, Mokhber Saltaneh, treated him as an outsider, and nearly deprived him and the procurator of decision-making power over the finances. Eventually, the governor was forced out. One could easily sense the local government was vying for autonomy. We observed this from reports of two important observers at the time, the Tehran-appointed Etemad Saltaneh and his deputy Jalal. The strong emergence of local government in Tabriz, as we thrashed, must have had to do with Tabriz's pivotal role during its year-long fight against the counter-revolution, where the experience of running the affairs independently from Tehran continued after the period of lesser tyranny. Azerbaijan was more insistent than any province about receiving salaries for the associations throughout the province. And even if, like other places, the central government turned it down, it still managed to force the procurator into covering its salaries and costs. Already by April of 1910, the provincial government and association in Tabriz had signaled hesitation towards allowing any taxes to be remitted to Tehran. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Remitted to Tehran, and this tendency gained force with time. They blocked revenues of the passport office, income from Khalese lands, confiscated a large part of grains used to pay the staff salaries throughout the province. They also bypassed the procurator by going directly to local rulers and tax officials to ask for money. And finally, they routinely asked the procurator for large, extraordinary sums and discouraged him from listening to Tehran. According to the treasurer Schuster, Azerbaijan was Iran's richest province with an income of 1 million tumans, but throughout his tenure, the center did not receive a single coin from that province. Now, the associations had a variety of alternatives before them, but could not remain as before. As voluntary, unpaid bodies with close ties to the legislature, extensive executive responsibilities, and with a hand in the judiciary, they needed a better defined role under the doctrine of separation of powers. Between the state and civil society, they had a number of options. On the state side, they could acquire a role akin to the administrative councils of the Ottoman Empire, modeled after the French provincial councils that reflected local concerns, or they could turn into elected provincial legislatures. On the civil society side, they could shed official responsibilities, retain their purely voluntary character, and act as an ideal intermediary between citizens and government. Possible were also a variety of compromises in between. As noted by Shapiro, popular sovereignty is not one and the same with parliamentary sovereignty. And the French revolutionary government, with its decision to discontinue the local grievance notebooks, here considered as petitions, fundamentally changed the nature of representation by closing off an alternative channel for presentation or expression of local concerns. Lamenting that loss, they point to hopeful signs in recent alternative democratic developments around the globe that complement the work of legislature for better expression of local wants. Now, despite the short life of constitutional movement, the association movement managed to introduce the modern decentralization idea. Two movements in the North grew out of the organizational remnants of two sturdy associations, namely the decentralizing Jangal and Khiyabani movements in Gilan and Azerbaijan. The latter displayed an unmistakable affinity with their former selves in membership, institutional memory, and constitutional rhetoric. This afterlife of constitutional movement has been unexplored, and with the revival of decentralization debate in contemporary Iran against central authoritarianism, the overlooked connections demand revaluation. The recent debates in Iran over decentralization have taken as their starting point the 1907 association laws, raising the prospect of possible revival of petitioning and associations as indigenous, alternative democratic possibilities in future Iran alongside the Legislative Assembly. They could, in fact, play a broader role by bridging the gap between the popular and parliamentary sovereignty. Yet with one caveat, in so many respects, the public of that time was more powerful against the state because it held a more mighty bargaining tool, namely the taxes. This is a tool that citizens of frontier states are nearly deprived of. Now, Tilley and Margaret Levy, in their studies of modern state formation, have made bargaining over taxes as key to the emergence of rights in Europe and America. And we get a glimpse of that in the course of constitutional movement in Iran. Now let me share with you my PowerPoint. And you see this, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
See the petition.
Okay, yes, you see the petition. This petition is, yes, the signatories to this petition, 65 individuals. And it's easy to think that these are 65 people, but a lot of them are actually representing much broader publics. Some are vakil or ru'aya, meaning that they have the confidence and much broader public representation. The petitions that arrive at this time, a lot of them have this quality, have this characteristic. This is the original petition, and this is the transliteration that I have. This is coming from Yas. And the sections I have highlighted, I don't need to read through them. You can read them for themselves. Where the yellow is places where I thought are important.
Dr. Sohrabi, you are breaking up again and we can't hear you now.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, very clear.
Yeah, okay, very good, very good. Yeah. The interesting thing, besides having 65 stamps on it, also gives you an idea of the representation, is its anti-Enlightenment discourse down here. That is very much against equality with Zoroastrians. In case you were wondering that I am celebrating the non-enlightenment discourse of this new public sphere, this is where they actually fall short compared to the Enlightenment discourse of the Majlis and the Assembly. And they actually take issue with that. They say that, look, you're killing yourself over the murder of a couple of Zoroastrians in Tehran and in Yazd, while this prominent Muslim was killed. Are we smaller than them? Are we lower than fire worshippers? Things of the sort. So you also get this side of the public sphere that is not so pleasant, that is not so interesting. But the other side is, in fact, it is expanding our imagination, our thinking about what public sphere is, far beyond what we had imagined it to be before. That if you have collective petitions reaching the assembly, getting aired at the assembly in assembly debates that everybody sees, at the same time associations being in contact with one another, and then airing those grievances, those wants through their own popular presses, through their own newspaper. Anyways, what we're seeing here is that a sphere that really talked about is to be part of the discourse. And this is where it's happening. And petitions being one of the most important places where this is happening, and has nothing to do with the middle class, has nothing to do with literacy, has nothing to do with kind of a Habermasian take on the public sphere, but is an entirely different arena. However, it's the coming together of the two that makes it so powerful. If it weren't for the assembly, we wouldn't see these things coming to fruition and bearing any kind of results. This is the The petition of discussion around the petition. Assembly. And this is very interesting. The interesting part about it is that here he is talking about the central government entering negotiations with petitioners. We have no example of this anywhere, anytime in Iranian history. Now, for the first time, we're actually seeing him. چه عیب دارد به آنها بفرمایید آرزین فردا فرد موضوع شکایت خود رو معین نموده مجموعاً یک نفر وکیل هم معلوم و روانه نمایند رسیدگی شده و the word is covered I can read it از مشیرالملک ظلمی درباره آنها شده احقاق حق و به عمل آمده و الی حقیقت امر مکشوف شد. We have no example of this at any other period where petitions can be so powerful and so successful in forcing the central state to negotiate with the actual petitioners. You may answer them, you may even give them a favorable response, but you don't negotiate. And here you are negotiating. When we come to Khorasan, governor to minister of finance, what is interesting about this is how extensive the associations are, how they have copied Tehran and proliferated, and how fearless now as the result, how fearless they have become towards the central government. Let me make this a bit larger, I think, if I can. Can you see this clearly?
Yes.
You see it as full screen, or is it
yes,
hidden
as
behind
full screen? Yeah.
Okay, I don't see it that way. Okay. Great. Yeah, that because of these associations, the subjects, the Rayat, has no longer any fear of the governor or even the minister. به مجرد احساس تعدی با زن و بچه‌اش در انجمن I can read the word شروع به دادخواهی و برای رفع ظلم حاضر است. Again, Rukn al-Dawla, the governor of Khorasan, to the minister of finance, that he is complaining that, look, you're chastising me for being unjust towards the Rayat because you've heard from the petitions through the assembly that this is what I'm doing. And I'm telling you, we cannot even speak to Adni Rayat. They speak to us without fear and have no trepidations. There has been no injustice against them simply because we cannot act unjustly towards them. And gets into the discussion of taxes and the like, and so on and so forth. This is the Gilan Association. This is where the association is giving a warning to the finance office that they have no right to submit a penny to Tehran. And of course, we know, as I said, the next day they actually take over the finance office. And here is the takeover. The several members are authorized to go to the finance office, to the tax office, and take over the proceeds. Am I going too fast, too slow?
You're going well.
Okay. This is the Gilan procurator to Minister of Finance. He's complaining about the illegal acts of the association. And he's warning him, if you take this too lightly, you will be confronting the entire nation, and not just this vilayat, not just this province. This will spread and will be all-encompassing, and you will be rendered completely powerless. Yeah, it's kind of more of the same, more of the same. When we come to Azerbaijan, again, we see the same kind of attitude, the same kind of undertakings, fixing their muscles, acting on completely autonomously. And in Gilan, if the cabinet, the new cabinet, it's very interesting that they call it cabinet, as if they have ministers within the nations. The cabinet has been formed within the association. Here, there is actually differentiation of function. Here we have a local government and we have an association in Azerbaijan. And they're both acting together, completely isolating the governor and the procurator and doing whatever they want, asking them for money, cutting off sources of revenues to them, going independently to tax collectors and local rulers, local governors, and asking them for money, on and on and on. And as I said, Schuster says they didn't receive a cent from Azerbaijan, which is the richest province of Iran. And the ministers kept writing to them, look, if Azerbaijan is acting this way, that is so prosperous, is not sharing anything with anyone, what do we expect from other provinces? What can we do? How can we survive? How can we survive? And this is Azerbaijan's, I can't, sorry. Oh, procurator to Minister of Finance, that is his response. Yeah, that they create associations, association of finance. Within the association, they ask for a salary, and we cannot do anything about it. They just go about their business as if we don't exist. And he keeps pressing the center to do something about this. And this is the minister's response. He's telling them, look, if you are declaring yourself autonomous, please tell us. So at least we would stop worrying about Azerbaijan and its well-being. Of course, that's rhetorical. Mm-hmm. And then he asks for this letter that was sent by the association to be distributed amongst all ministers in the cabinet in Tehran, so they see what the association is up to and how dangerous that is. There's some other additional petitions of interest that I bring up. This is a very interesting one. And what is interesting about it is that it's written during the period of lesser tyranny. That is the period where Muhammad Ali Shah is victorious, that 1 year period from June 1908 to July 1909, the period of lesser tyranny. And what we see in this period is a shift in the petitions. Not a complete shift, but a partial shift. This thing written here, it says Arize. Do you see my flash on the screen?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, this thing here, it says Arize. And whenever you see this, you know that this is written by a professional petition writer. So, and then adopting the old format of petition and response and the respectful language, the deference that they show towards the ministers or towards the Shah. And what is interesting about it is that this is no longer addressed to the assembly, but it's addressed to the minister. But it's addressed to the minister explicitly for delivery to the Shah. So Shah, again, is assuming his position as the source of justice at the expense of the assembly. What assembly had done to the Shah before and had enraged him. But now we're switching back. We're going back to the format of petition and response. We see again the emergence of that deferential language, very polite language. But what is interesting, and these are the signatories, and what is interesting is when you look at it, in fact, they're saying that they want the continuation of the efforts, begging that the Shah was over the assembly and its reforms, its financial reforms, and they're asking them to please continue what the assembly was doing without saying it, but saying it in so many words. Saying it explicitly that we want the tuyul to be discontinued. For why we were also there, we were happy that this is done. We never benefited from it, but please also make us part of that equation and also abolish our tuyuls. These were very good, and this is one of the major things that actually enraged the Shah and the anti-constitutionalists. It was the abolition of tuyul. And now we have this kind of a mixture of the new form and the old form. In appearance, everything conforms to the old form, but in reality, the content is actually very much in continuity with what is happening during the constitutional period. And finally, I think I got out. Finally, yeah, can you see this clearly?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Yeah. Most petitions actually became quite informal during the constitutional period. They didn't look like this. They didn't look like this. This written by professional petition writers and using all this formalistic language. I don't want to say they just vanished. They didn't, but a lot of them became quite informal, as you can see here. And they address the assembly in very familiar terms. They feel a lot more comfortable with it, and they ask for redress of grievances. As usual, it's the taxes that are at issue. I'm open to questions. Do you have any?
Very good. Thank you very much, Dr. Sohrabi, for your very engaging presentation. And I am sure there are a number of questions amongst our colleagues. Anyone who wants to jump in? And maybe to set up the conversation, you made a reference to Habermas's notion of the public sphere. And also you noted that the Iranian situation during the constitutional revolution is different. I'm wondering whether you could consider sort of separate sphere, multiple public spheres, that they are not all unified and cohered as a national, but each province has its own public, or cities have their own public, their own needs, their own demands, and they are articulating it differently. And the kind of differences that you see probably has a lot to do with the differences of between province of Azerbaijan with the center, or that of Mazandaran and Gilan with the center, and take that differential relations with the center into account. And the other part that I thought it would be really interesting if you could further elaborate, this fear that there is not going to be any authority left. I'm wondering to what extent that is kind of a discourse of counterinsurgency, writing that, you know, the Roya have become very Puru and they are not, listening to anyone. They are not paying anything. We have to do something about it. And that fear mongering could be, you know, it has a strategic purpose embedded in it. Does that make sense?
Yes. I think should I answer? Should I respond to you, or
yeah,
okay,
please.
Your first question had 3 points. One, let me cut off my video again.
Or you remove your slide so we can see you well.
Oh, okay.
And let's try with your video, and then if it breaks up, then we can go to face sound. Okay, please.
Yeah, actually I had 3. One is the connection between what I call the non-enlightenment public sphere with the enlightenment-oriented public sphere. So that is very important. Yes, they are coming together, they are interacting, but they are at the same time keeping separate and having their own dynamics, having their own publics, having their own discourse, having their own concerns. These are very different. So we have to be really cognizant of that. And once we do that, we realize how much wider actually this public sphere is. Rather than concentrating on on intellectually driven press or the debates on the assembly, we can now look into areas where a lot of action is happening, a lot of are being made, and a lot of victories scored. A lot of little victories, changing this ruler here and there, reducing these taxes here and there. These are things that we usually do not account for when we look at the constitutional movement. And then we say, oh, this was a defeat because Russia invaded and ended the constitution and whatnot. And we also don't look at the connections with the afterlife and whatnot. So this, I think, really expands our view that no. This experiment may have come to the end formally, but it may have had actually incredibly lasting effect as far as the public political culture and popular political culture, and showing the limits of possible. That is the point that is very interesting. But at the end of the day, we really have to look at both together. If you don't have an assembly with the pretensions that the intellectuals have of it, of a legislative assembly, separation of powers, on and on and on, you never find a house of justice that will be so powerful in Iran. Right. So it's really the conjunction of the two that is making this institution powerful. So an empty, an isolated House of Justice would be nothing, and an empowered assembly far more than the simple assembly that we imagine.
Yeah, if I may focus, because one of the issues that we wanted to sort of advance with this seminar series is to really break away from modular historical narratives of, for example, constitutionalism, as you discussed, and follow where, in this case, petitions, documents, and archives lead us. For example, if you go to the city of Yazd, where there is highly diverse population, Muslim, Zoroastrian, and others, when you think of constitutionalism, then the constitutionalism for Zoroastrian Iranians could mean empowering equality with Muslims, and where, on the other hand, Muslim citizens of Yazd may claim that they should have the right, they are the majority, they should dominate the non-Muslims. And that comes out, that diversity, in a sense, the kind of urban diversity that existed in the pre-constitutional period, now because of equality rights is becoming articulated differently into separate spheres that do not lead to democratization alone. There are other options.
Exactly. That was your second point, which I was going to get to.
Yeah.
The variation within Iran, the variation within that non-public sphere within Iran is amazing. In fact, Yazd is a place where the associations are at all, and the clerics, as a result, play a far bigger role than they do in Azerbaijan or in Gilan. So that's one that's a big variation here, right there. And the fact that Yazd has such a large Zoroastrian population, this discourse of, in fact, inequality comes to the fore. People who are calling themselves die-hard constitutionalists have no realization that this is a center of constitutionalism. This is when a Zoroastrian merchant is killed in Tehran, the whole country is up in flames, wondering, is he going to be punished according to Sharia, or is he going to be punished according to constitutional law? Is it going to be an eye for an eye, or is it going to be simply a payment of jizya? And hence, what that petition that I had for merchant and Zoroastrian merchant is killed in Yazd, and the association is killed in Yazd, and it's questioning the assembly. Why are you so obsessed with this fire worshipper, this Zoroastrian merchant in Yazd? Are we Muslims lower than them, that you pay no attention to this prominent Muslim that is killed? And so that's the other side of the discourse that is very interesting, and that kind of variation that is very interesting. Then you go to Qom, for example, or Qom is not a big center of activity to Mashhad, to Khorasan. We see that clerics, have big roles in Isfahan. They have big roles. Even the association is dominated in Isfahan, for example. But no such a thing. But the concern is incredibly uniform, and it's in the first period. And in the second period, all becomes about both central and local to the center, in places where you have powerful associations, of course, not everywhere. So that's also interesting. A new language or concern or really exploration of that non-enlightenment discourse would not come through petitions, because, as I said, they're limited to the ending taxes. They want to be very efficient. When they speak to centers of power, they want to bring up the most important issue that is at stake, taxes. But when you look at their presses, actually, their popular presses, and by that I don't mean Sur Esrafil or Musavat or Hablul Matin and things of the sort. I mean the newspaper of Anjuman of Tabriz, Association of Gilan, Association of Khorasan. We see a new world emerging that beyond taxes, they talk about so many things. In Khorasan, for example, there's obsession with opium addiction and the desire to shut down all tea houses because they are opium dens. They waste the youth of the country, and on. Anyway, so that's just one example. I can't hear you.
Sorry. I said thank you very much. Any questions, colleagues, friends? Professor Jenkins?
Okay.
Yes.
Hello. I just want to say thank you for this fascinating talk, which I really enjoyed, and it gave so much food for thought. As you know, I work on the sort of the German reports during the constitutional period, and they do report extensively on regional, all of the regional developments, which they're sympathetic to. And so there's a wealth of information there as well on the regional, sort of the popular and lasting effects, the sort of transformative effects in political culture during the constitutional period. So I really was so fascinated with what you were saying. I was trying to locate a number of the specific items with dates, and also because you didn't give a lot of dates. You were distinguishing, of course, between the first and second constitutional periods, but the kind of specific turns and things I was wondering about the dates there, but also about how in the North, like the Schuster mission complains extensively about how they're shut out in the North, that they can't operate in the North, that there's no way that they can bring about any kind of connection or interaction in the North, and then the general question about, and I'm looking through all these, I took so many notes on your talk, the ways in which these local developments and local aspirations, especially in Gilan and Azerbaijan and in Tabriz in particular, how they become kind of the ground for something else when the Russians move in, because after 1911, and the German documents report extensively and in detail about Russian power across the north of Iran and these desires to sever Azerbaijan from the center. So I wondered if you could say something about the ways in which these popular political developments in Tabriz after 1911 and into the Balkan Wars turn into something else under kind of Russia's military occupation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you for one thing. I think we can use this kind of document.
Dr. Sohrabi, you are breaking up again.
Believe me, it has nothing to do with me.
You're good now. Every time I say it, the sound improves.
Okay. All right. Yes. The way we can rethink that relationship is that Schuster, of course, is complaining about Russia and Russian presence in the north, about so much problems they're giving him, all justified. You know, they don't want him to operate there. They don't want him to do anything there. And anything he does, any kind of reforms, Russia is expanding into Iran. I didn't know this, but recently I've been reading some stuff that they say that after the occupation, Russia had actually started establishing villages and buildings all over the north in Gilan and whatnot. And it hadn't been fact for the 1970s. I kind of have no doubt that that was lost forever. It was that temporary period where Bolsheviks changed their mind and said these are imperialist intrusions and we should leave the peoples in the East alone. They were back, of course, but that was already too late. Kind of things regrouped and there was no way of assuming the same position that they had before. All of this is that also a lot of resistance on rule of the reason there is not simply because he's refused, is because the government and are ordering the financial office not to send anything to you. Now, the problem, as always, it's the procurator that is also corrupt. That he's also pocketing a lot of the revenue, and Schuster talks about that. But Schuster doesn't make any mention of the associations and the vying for autonomy that we see in Azerbaijan and in Gilan. And that is certain, and in Khorasan. And certainly part of the equation that he ignores, and partly for the reason that he's there, he doesn't really, he's only in operation for, he has his post 6 months, and he's not, but it's these kinds of rich kind of local knowledge and penetration into the locality of what is going on inside, within the Tabriz government, within the Rasht government, that new things come to light, that look, there's a lot of also resistance from the locality.
Very good. Thank you much. Dr. Mujan Momen, please unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that presentation. I just, you mentioned all the way through petitions from Anjumans, but I'm wondering, were there petitions from other groups, from minority religions, tribal groups, and perhaps even individuals? And how are these dealt with? Did the central government pay any attention to petitions from just individuals, for example, or were they just sort of dismissed as being of no importance?
I have to say that individual petitions really don't carry that much importance now. You do get individual petitions that are connected to the general movement. You do get that. But those we cannot really count as individual, because they're part of that stream of things that are coming in. They're complementing them rather than saying it different. We do get, of course, some petitions here and there, about divorce or about inheritance or about this and that. What is most interesting are petitions by minorities. And they are also, in the spirit of constitutionalism, in the spirit of petitioning, they also start petitioning. And those, a few that I have come across from Jewish communities in Damavand, no, I'm sorry, not Damavand, Nahavand in Hamadan, and Jewish communities elsewhere over specific issues, for example, inheritance, that are most interesting, that are really, really interesting. From Zoroastrian community, I talked about a bit. And usually my impression is that they're usually more articulate than your regular petitions that you receive from the rest of, local, ordinary public people who are interested in writing petitions, these are including members of middle class that are participating and writing. And as a result, their discourse is very interesting. It's very pro-constitutional. It's very sophisticated. It's talking about them for the first time becoming citizens of Iran with equal rights, with equal obligations, but at the same time with equal rights. And when is the Iranian government is going to recognize that and acknowledge that? We also see them, as in the Ottoman Empire, going through involving foreign powers into their disputes and into their problems. And as in the Ottoman Empire, the attempt that in this constitutional era, we no longer need foreign interference into the affairs of our own citizens. These are full-fledged citizens, and this is the time for foreign powers to step aside and let us deal with the issue. So, these kind of things are going on, and they are very interesting. One that I can tell you about that just kind of sticks into my mind is a Jewish community petitioning against a woman who is part of their community, who has, in their words, opportunistically converted to Islam and has usurped the inheritance of the entire family. Because she's Muslim, now she can inherit, and the rest are excluded from that inheritance. And discussions in the assembly about what should I do, about the associations, saying what should we do? According to the laws of the land, I don't know if they call it Mini, I don't think they could add that literal, but something quite literal. Secular laws, of course, and the constitutional law. We are equal, and the inheritance cannot be channeled in this way. While the Sharia court has given a ruling in favor of the new convert to Islam. And that is causing all kinds of issues in the locality. And the association finding itself very, very concretely and very explicitly saying that there are worldly laws and there are heavenly laws. And we are caught between which one should we go along with. So we see that also within the assembly, those kinds of discussions as well, and they get reflected locally over these issues.
Very good. Thank you very much. Ustad Firuzeh Kashani Sabit has a note. Ustad Kashani, would you like to say that yourself or ask a question? If you're still around. No. Any other questions? Colleagues, friends? No? If not, Jennifer Jenkins, Professor Jenkins.
Sorry, I'm back again. But just to ask if Nader, if you could say something about, the way that things kind of change into their opposites. What is your view on how these developments in the north, these local developments, and really I agree with the way that you talked about them as lasting effects of the constitutional revolution, this transformation in political culture, which is so striking and so important, but how that could become, like, especially the wish to be severed from the center of Iran, or to challenge that relationship, how this could provide fuel for kind of very authoritarian actions carried out by the Russians across the north. I agree with you. I also, in my documents, I see the Germans report extensively on everything the Russians are doing across the north, down into detail. And they are working toward a kind of bottom-up transformation of the province. And when you might have answered this earlier, but the connection was cutting in and out, and I didn't hear your response. And I would be so interested to hear how you think about kind of this transformation into its opposite across the North after 1912. Thank you.
Oh, transformation into its opposite, meaning the defeat of the constitutional movement?
Well, the way that the Russians use these local aspirations to create their own project of severing Azerbaijan from Tehran.
From Tehran, yeah. I really looked into it. You would be a far better authority than me on that issue, but I'm making my way.
Thank you.
But as I said, I don't think if it hadn't been for the 1917 revolution, north of Iran could have survived. That it was very lucky. It was a contingency. And
I agree.
The constitutionalists, yeah. Anyways, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And one final question from Dr. Negin Yavari. Negin John, please. Negin.
Sorry. Thank you very much for a wonderful talk and for very new, all these new and wonderful ways of looking at the constitutional revolution. I think we're all grateful for that. I just have a very quick question, which is drawing on your expertise on the Ottoman Empire. Do you see structural differences between the Iranian and the Ottoman political scene? You could tell us, even if the Ottoman Empire is vast, so even in Istanbul, do you see on so many other issues there seems to be a tracing of developments generally from the Iranian side lagging behind the Ottoman scene, but do you see similar issues there, or is this kind of petitioning very much embedded in a political culture that sort of ends in the Persephone zone? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It doesn't end there, of course not. It's first of all, it never was only limited to Iran. It's a Near Eastern phenomenon. It goes far further back than thousands of years. So the Ottomans are benefiting from that. They're also benefiting from being part of the being drastically affected by the Iranian political culture as well. So petitioning for them is also very important. And we do see petitions coming in. They have a special office for the receipt of petitions in the Ottoman Empire, which is very meaningful. The name is very meaningful. Daire Umur Rekabiye, which means the office of the king on the horseback, or on the sultan on the horseback, meaning that that's where you receive the petitions. You would go on the horseback out into the field, and people would approach you and provide you with your petition. And that name didn't change until early 20th century. That's what it was still called. And the Ottoman Sultan, when he went to Friday prayers, he would sit by the head of that office would sit by him in his carriage. And people would go out, they would send out these little officials, administrators, out into the open to the public with a bag around their necks where the public could stuff their petitions in them and bring them to the Sultan. So it had a lot of symbolic meaning, this king as the Sultan, as the center of justice, as the center of dissemination of whatever that is good in the world. and at the same time combining that with his position as caliph and going to Friday prayer and doing this. So that's very interesting. All that said and done, and yes, Iranian constitution in a lot of respects lags behind the Ottomans at the level of, the what I call the Enlightenment public sphere is quite sophisticated in the Ottoman. It happens there first with the young Ottomans in a very serious fashion. Then we see the echoes of it through Malkam. We see the echoes of it through Mustashar al-Dawla and the like. Iranians don't like to hear that, but what can I say? This is what I see. On the other hand, what is really interesting is the popular dimension of the Iranian movement, that we have nothing like it. There is popular involvement, there is popular expressions, there are resistance to taxes, actually. In the Ottoman Empire, for periods of time, taxes stopped flowing in because now everybody says there's justice, there's constitution, now we don't have to pay taxes. So we do have that, but this alternative public sphere with its own press, with its own contacts, with its own associations all over, this is really unprecedented. It's nothing that Iran had ever seen before, nor is it repeated in other places for years to come in the Middle East. So in that respect, yes, things are very different. And in that respect, that transformation at the popular level that is happening in Iran is very important, very important. And its effect, Iran is like so contentious. The public is so ready to protest, to jump in. And where does that come from? Okay, we have the tobacco movement, but the real watershed, I believe, is the constitutional movement. But with an added factor, and I said this, in passing at the very end, is that at the time, the public had a far more powerful tool at its disposal, and that was the taxes. And now they're deprived of that tool. They're far more prosperous. They're far more capable. But at the same time, they don't have that bargaining chip against their states. And that's the tragedy. They have the culture of contentiousness. They have the culture of protest. They know their rights. And at the same time, they are deprived of that very important tool that allowed the peasant in Ardakan to enter direct negotiations with the Minister of Finance, and then the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister.
Thanks to the oil revenues.
Yes, yes, it's the rentier state. Yes.
Just give me a yes or no to this one. Do you see regional variation? Like most of the stuff do you see the same as a parity between Khorasan and Azerbaijan, or do you see a lot more activity in Azerbaijan or in the Western provinces?
No, there's definitely difference. There's definitely difference. Yeah, as I said, when you look at Isfahan, for example, the association is officially dominated by the clerics. They call the shots. They write the letters. They direct everything. And we don't see that at all in Azerbaijan. We don't see that at all in Khorasan. It's a kind of a halfway position, actually. It's not exactly dominated by the clerics. But at the same time, the religious discourse there is far more important than it is in a variety of other places. So as Muhammad was saying, as you're saying, as I am pursuing, we really have to also fine-tune these variations and look at not only the similarities, but also the differences within these various places and how it worked out, how it played out.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. One last question from Dr. Pardis Minucher. Dr. Minucher, could you unmute yourself? Dr. Minucher, are you there? All right. It seems like she has moved away from her screen. Well, Dr. Nader Sohrabi, thank you very much for your impressive presentation that really invites all of us scholars of Iranian constitutionalism to pay more attention to the diversity of positions and to the nature of the public and various discourses that are being generated during the process of constitutionalism. We are grateful to you for your amazing work. And thank you everyone for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon.